Live from the Business RadioX studio in Atlanta, it's time for Organization Conversation, brought to you by Wall Control Storage Systems. Wall Control gives you the storage and organization you crave. Now, here's your host, Richard Grove.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Organization Conversation. This one is a little bit different. I had the opportunity to be on a podcast called Masters of Home Service that's hosted by a company called Jobber, and got to thinking a lot of our audience are entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, home service professionals, home organizers, garage installers, and the topics that we covered on the Masters of Home Service podcast would really, I think, our audience would get a lot of benefit from hearing. So they were kind enough to let me replay it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to play the episode that I recorded with Adam out in Las Vegas at a really amazing studio these guys had. So the quality's fantastic. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you take something. I hope you can take something away from it that you can apply to your own business or just your day-to-day life, trying to improve efficiencies. We cover topics from AI to inflation and marketing tips that anyone can employ. So check it out, stay tuned, and let me know what you think.
If you send an email that's like, inflation's coming, our cost is going up,
it's getting open.
Click inside, it's getting open, and they're clicking. And so boom, that's good. That's good for that.
Welcome to Jobber's Masters of Home Service, a podcast for home service pros by home service pros. We are in sunny Las Vegas, bringing you strategies for tackling inflation, managing costs, pricing, payroll, all that stuff. I'm Adam Sylvester. Today's guest is Richard Grove. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks, Adam. It's great to be here.
So first, tell our listeners who you are, what you do, what your background is.
Yeah, I'm Richard. A lot of people know me from Wall Control. It's a wall-mounted storage brand. A lot of Jobber clients also use the product for home installs and that sort of thing. And through my experience growing that, I've learned a lot of lessons that apply to a lot of different small businesses trying to scale themselves up. And so I was able to turn that into a small business consultancy where I help other brands and businesses and solopreneurs do the same kind of thing. My day job is Wall Control and all the umbrella brands that we have. And then outside of that time, I just enjoy trying to help other brands and businesses. If I can help people get through a pitfall that made me stumble for months on end, I love to be able to do that. And that's what I really enjoy doing. So,
cool. Yeah, a lot of experience in this. What would you say is the first thing that our listeners need to make sure that they've got dialed in when they're trying to tackle this ever-increasing inflation problem that everyone's facing?
Absolutely. The first thing I see, and it's easy enough to be guilty of this myself in my own businesses, people think they know their numbers and they really don't have a great feel for it. And the reason is when things are going well, you might look at your P&L and your balance sheet and everything looks pretty good. Everything's fine. And it's easy to kind of lose sight of the unit economics that make up, your cost of goods sold and all these different line items. The thing about it is that's sustainable when things are going good. But when a variable changes, particularly inflation, stuff starts shifting and you quickly don't realize where you're profitable and where you're not. The first thing I tell business owners is, how well do you know your numbers? And they're like, oh, I look at my P&L, my balance sheet all the time. Everything looks good. I'm like, all right, well, what about your unit economics? And for us, for Wall Control, that's going to be the cost of steel, the cost of powder, the cost of corrugate, all in a particular SKU or a family of SKUs. And for someone else, that might be, say you're a lawn care maintenance, that might be, what is your true cost to mow a lawn? Like how many people are you using? How much are you paying them? And some of this sounds obvious. And people are like, oh yeah, I do that. Mm-hmm. And to them, I say, when did you do it last? And usually it's not even within the past year. The first thing I would recommend is dig back into those numbers, get those folders out of the drawer, get the spreadsheets back up, no judgment, however you want to figure it out, but try to get the unit economics figured out and then make sure the macroeconomics on the balance sheet and P&L look pretty good. And then let's try to figure out what variables are changing so that you can make adjustments accordingly. Because another thing that I've seen that I'm guilty of and I've seen other people be guilty of, the thing they think is bringing in the profitability might not be, just because they're staying busy with it, or there's some gut intuition that we're doing well here. And sometimes that's the first place you want to go look to make sure it's not just wasting your time and your profit.
I think a lot of our listeners, things are going well, but they don't really know why. And so
Exactly.
if it broke, they wouldn't know how to fix it.
Exactly.
And knowing your numbers means that you know why it's working.
Yep.
So if it stops working, you know how to get it working again. So you talked about unit cost. What are some other numbers that our listeners should really pay attention to fighting inflation?
The unit cost, it kind of depends on how you run it. And I always like to put the overhead and the employee cost into that element. And so what we're seeing with like rising labor cost and all the pieces that flow into that is you want to make sure you're plugging that in correctly. If you're the one owner doing it, it's a little harder for this to happen. But if you have 2 or 3 people looking at it, they'll shift this cost over here, and then this person will put this one over here, and it's kind of lost in the middle. Case example, so the person packing this box, did that count for the unit economics of the part they were packing, or was that for maybe the top level for us for a panel versus like a kit that's being put together? So make sure there's no loss of communication as to where the handoff is. That labor cost element is easy to get wishy-washy where it's at, So like driving to a job site, did that count toward the first lawn or the second lawn? Like where are you breaking this down at? And sometimes that can be the difference between profitability or not. If you're talking, 10 to 20%, the labor cost again is probably where I see it get the most loose and unable to like dial it down exactly.
Well, let's talk about labor, because labor is usually for most of our listeners the biggest cost. Cutting down labor costs is usually not the least fun thing for business owners. What are some strategies for them?
What I have found is try to compensate your employees with things outside of just direct cash in their paycheck. I mean, that's what everybody wants. I understand it. I want it too. At the end of the day, everybody is trading their time for compensation in some form or fashion. If you can't control the money side, try to control the time side and give them their time back. And you can find creative ways to do this. So it can be work from home has gotten wildly popular if that's an option for some businesses. A more flexible schedule is something we're working on where they're actually providing the same amount of work. It just works better for their life, especially if they've got small kids or family or aging parents or something. You can work that into it. And the cool thing about that too is it makes the relationship with the employee more personal, and they, I feel like, are more appreciative of you taking you're making an exception for them, and that makes people feel nice. Now, at the same time, it's difficult to scale that across hundreds and hundreds of employees. But the thing I've learned is you do want to think about scalability, but you don't want to get lost in that. You still want to do nice things for people when you can. And so just try to do that and see what happens. And you can always change it and always go back to where you were. Another thing you can do, this is a little bit harder, but you can also provide some sort of piece of new opportunity. So like as employees get excited about the product and they want to develop something themselves, if they come up with something or a business plan or some little spinoff, you could give them a piece of that and they could have some future upside in it. It doesn't cost you anything today, but to give a certain amount of equity in that gives them ownership, and it's, they can see the value in the efforts they put in. So, and I know that's not an option for everybody, but just you got to think creatively like this.
I also think when it comes to payroll and people, payroll is people, and labor costs and wages and all that, I think that a mindset shift has to change for a lot of business owners, because I think a lot of business owners think that their people aren't really willing to like join the fight.
Yeah.
But a lot are.
Yes.
And I think a lot of team members are willing to suck in a little bit, work a little bit longer to avoid having to get that piece of equipment or hire that second person if it helps the company in the long run. So I think shifting our mindset a little bit and being like, hey guys, we're in this together. Let's go tackle this, instead of being like, I'm all by myself, my people don't care. I think that's not true most of the time.
Absolutely. That is an excellent point, Adam, because I've seen this firsthand. An employee might not even seem motivated. You might be like, they don't even care. I had one employee and I kind of saw where their interest was. And I was like, hey, we're trying to do this thing that's in a similar space. Do you have an interest in going to this conference and kind of doing some recon and helping develop a particular unit that might work well in that space? And then they just took to it. It's like a completely different employee the next day, So if they're just in spreadsheets and working on operational things and get it in, get it out, it just isn't there. So that's a really good point.
And they have to be aware. They're not sitting in the same seat as you, and so they don't know all the stuff that you know until you tell them, and then they can take some different actions. My buddy Oscar Gill, he's a jobber friend. Every time he comes up with a new revenue stream, one of his people takes it by the horns and just learns it and just learns everything about it. Richard, this is a great conversation. I'm going to pause for a minute and talk about Jobber. One of the things that really changed my life with Jobber is several years ago, I was telling my clients that we would automatically invoice them. And it wasn't automatic. It was just Adam going in every month and just tapping the invoice button hundreds of times. And one time I was driving to my wife's family for vacation. I was doing it. My wife was driving. It took so long and I hated it. And then Jobber came out with automatic invoicing. And for my lawn mowing business, we have hundreds of invoices every week. That's a game changer. That changed my life, literally. And so I love Jobber for that. I love their automatic invoicing a lot. I love all their features, but that was one very dear to my heart. New users get an exclusive discount at jobber.com/podcast deal, and go get Jobber. It'll change your life. Okay, so managing costs.
Yeah.
Huge one.
Right.
What are some ways that our listeners can what are some costs we can just cut today? And then what are some costs that we can cut over time?
Everybody does have something that can absolutely be cut, and
Totally.
that is going back to the numbers and understanding your unit economics in your business. We went through this phase where it was like more seemed better, more SKUs, more selection, more custom, more all this stuff. And so you end up spreading yourself thin, and you kind of lose your focus, and you're not going right after what your core business is. So we cut tons of it, and it led to really good profitability. You would think like, oh man, you can't cut all that because you're going to lose 30% of your revenue, and that's not what happened. In fact, you increased revenue because you took away a little bit of paralysis by analysis from your customer, and less selection led to more conversion. But it's also a fine thing, because another thing we've learned with pricing, especially going through this inflationary time, is rather than just cut something, sometimes it makes sense to tier pricing. And the thing that used to be the only offering at that price point, you can now move to maybe a good, better, best model and make that just the good option. Tailor it down a little bit, take some bells and whistles off of it, and leave the price point the same, so you're not moving that for a customer, but then introduce something that's a little bit of an upsell that almost used to be the same thing. It's like shrinkflation a little bit, but not really. So it's like the tiered pricing and the good, better, best optionality has been really helpful navigating and going through this inflationary time.
This actually makes me think of a creative little thing that came up with a while back. Is our listeners can actually think of what they're doing for free and charge for it.
Yes.
And so if you, for example, have a 30-day guarantee, you could take that guarantee away and make it a 90-day guarantee and charge for it. You'll be amazed at what happens.
Exactly. I have a podcast, and the producer of it, his name's John Ray. He's a business consultant himself, but he published a new book called The Generosity Mindset, and it's pretty much all about pricing. It's similar to what you're saying in the sense that you come at everything with that generosity mindset, but a lot of times you're giving away more than the customer even wants. Like,
right.
You're spending your time providing this insane service, and they don't even need it.
Right.
So like, go ahead and don't be afraid to move that around and charge for it, or eliminate it, and nobody's going to mind at all. It's going to benefit everybody. It's a much more efficient conversation.
Yeah, and generally the thing that the client doesn't really care about is the thing that causes our infield staff the most headaches.
Yeah, exactly.
And so ask your staff, like, what's the most annoying thing about your day? And it often will be like one of the greatest inefficiencies in your company.
Yeah. Obviously approaching everything on the cost side too. So that has been the biggest challenge for us during inflation with the brands I work with. The cost of steel, the cost of powder coating, the cost of corrugate, the cost of shipping has gone up, and the cost of insurance, everything's going up.
Everything's going up. So how do you negotiate with those suppliers? Like, any tactics on
yes.
getting better rates and stuff?
I would say, and that has been the hardest part for us, because we on some of these brands we're dealing with big Fortune 100 companies who have much more, weight and
leverage.
Yeah, they're so much harder to negotiate with. And the thing we found is it has got to be tied to something solid. You can't just loosey-goosey be like, oh, I need a 10% cost increase on steel. St. Louis Fed publishes like really good graphs that are free to everybody online. You can go search cost of sheet steel, and you can see the graph. You can screenshot that. You can put that in a presentation and say, look, from this date to this date, my cost of steel's gone up 11.75%. I need that cost. And you know what? I'll give you 2 points on it. Like, I just need like 8 or 9, or you can get like that. But one thing I found is you also want to be super specific on the ask. You're going to have more success asking for a 10.25 point in cost increase than a 10-point cost increase, because that extra quarter point looks like you've done your due diligence, and this is really what your business needs to stay healthy. And I really need that. I need that last little quarter point. Don't be afraid to get really specific with that and ask for exactly what you need. down to the decimal point.
I like that.
So that's been helpful for us. And one thing I will say too, just tactically, especially when you're dealing with these, big Fortune 100 companies, or even just your biggest client, whatever you ask for going up, they're going to ask for going down, and it's going to be a lot. They're going to fight for it as soon as it starts to tick back down. Whatever chart you give them or graph that you give them, you're going to see that graph again when deflation eventually starts to come upon us. So just be careful with that. You don't want to put yourself in a bad situation down the road. You want it to be specific, but you want there to be some proprietary reasoning why it needs to be at that point.
Yeah.
So,
I also think that a lot of our listeners out there they pride themselves on getting the very best price. It doesn't matter if it's that supplier or that supplier or that supplier or that supplier. It's like, hold on a second. I think there's some loyalty and relationships that need baked into the cake. And so, for example, one of our suppliers, their sales guy, who we're pretty close with, took all of us out to breakfast a while back, which was cool. I appreciate that. And in the process, I asked him, hey, what can we do for you? And he said, well, my boss really wants as many clients as we can to be on a charge account where you don't pay cash or credit card every time you come in. It's just an account. Like, okay, if that makes you look good, we can do that. He said, yeah, and we'll give you 1% savings on everything. I was like, okay. I mean, 1% is better than 0%. And so there's a little, you're not looking for the humongous hammer. You're looking for little taps all over the place. And that's how you save money.
And another point of being able to lower costs creatively is have those relationships. So don't go for the lowest price can be deceiving because it might not be the lowest cost over the long term.
Right.
And so we ran into volume went down on a particular SKU that led to a cost increase in corrugate that's used to package that SKU.
Okay.
And corrugate's going up as it is. I can't lose a pricing tier, like the volume, I can't lose the pricing tier, and I can't absorb that level of a cost increase on it. So because of relationships and because of not quoting it out every single time it moved by a penny, we're able to say, hey, look, I'll give you this same volume. I'll buy it. I just can't take it today. I'll buy it all over the next 6 months, and I'll give you the PO today, but can you put this in your warehouse and keep it for us over the next 6 months? And then if 6 months come and I haven't taken delivery of it, you can ship it all to me, then that's fine. Creatively leveraging where the inventory sits, when you're invoiced for it, what the terms are, all these things come into play when you have a long-term relationship and you just don't have a bidding war every time costs move, 1%.
That's exhausting.
Hey, Masters of Home Service listeners, we're giving you a friendly heads up that our podcast artwork is getting a refresh on July 11th, so it might look a little different next time we pop up wherever you listen to podcasts. But don't worry, our show isn't changing. We're still here to share valuable tips and advice to help your business grow and thrive. Enjoy this episode. It's a good one.
Now, on the other hand, though, it does help to keep your suppliers in check a little bit. Thinking of a time when they sent me an email that I didn't like. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, well, I'll go check the other guy. And they're like, wait a second.
Yes.
Come back.
I'll say this. If you're listening to this, you're a business owner and you're successful, this takes nuance. And that's what we're in. We're in this season of inflationary. It's a ballet. And so the better you are at dancing with it, the better off you're going to be when you come out. And your competitors, you're going to shake a lot of them if you can handle this correctly.
It's a dance.
It is
art,
a dance.
It's not a science.
Yeah.
Okay, so what if at the end of the day, we just have to raise our prices too?
Yeah.
And so then we have a whole client side we have to deal with.
Yes.
What are some tactics for making sure that we let them down slowly?
Yes. This is exactly what I like to do on the pricing side is just like on the cost side, be as communicative as possible. Give them as much detail as you can. Here's what I'm seeing. Look, we hate to do this. And so one thing we'll do on the direct-to-consumer side, and you can do this with any business, what we'll do is we'll warn them with the sale. So it's like good news, bad news. Like bad news, our costs are going up. Check out this chart. Steel's on the rise. We've got 2 more months at the same price point. We're running inflation sale before it hits. Mm-hmm. And so it gets people to buy that day or schedule service that day. But now they know, okay, next time I need service or I need product, it's probably going to be a little bit higher price point because these guys warned me about it before. So I think that's a lot better than they come to schedule service and the last time they did, it was 20% cheaper and all of a sudden now it's more. And if you send an email that's like, inflation's coming, our cost is going up.
It's getting open.
Click inside. It's getting open and they're clicking. And so boom, that's good. That's good for that. So yeah.
Yeah. I think there's 2 listeners listening right now. One listener is really on top of his pricing and they need to make small little changes. Mm-hmm. And then I think there's a lot of listeners out there that they're behind on raises. Yes. And so they need to rip the Band-Aid off. Instead of a 2% increase, they just need to rip the Band-Aid off and raise 10%. Richard, there is a reality here though that at some point, some of our listeners' clients, some of my clients, some of your clients just simply can't afford the higher cost. And which I get, not everyone has an ever increasing budget and all that, fixed incomes. And so how do you deal with them from a business owner perspective and just a human perspective?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
One thing that we found that's helpful, and it helps develop the relationship a little more personally too, if you're able to do this sort of thing, is just be honest with them and tell them, look, we're inches apart where we need to be. I can't meet you where you're at, and I don't want to price you out. Is there anything you can do to just help me with my business in general? And basically what I would suggest is try to spin up some sort of lead generation out of that segment of customers. So bring me a lead, get 10% off your next order. And now we're back to being kind of on the same footing. So try to leverage that to, get them to think about, if their neighbor's yard looks like garbage, then give me Bob's name and we'll send them a flyer in the mail or something. Little things like that where you feel like you've met in the middle. They've done something to try to meet you and you're doing something to try to meet them.
There's always gonna be the customer who's bluffing, and they might have some ill intent. Let's forget about them for a minute.
Right. This is the genuine. That's the other thing too, because at a certain point, it's like, how do you draw that line? And also, say you did this 6 months ago, and now you're in the same conversation 6 months later. So yeah.
That's why it helps to rip the Band-Aid off if you can, so you don't keep having the conversation, you can avoid it. But I think there's a lot of people who, I think business owners can not negotiate with their clients, but I think you can have a legitimate conversation. Hey, we do need to raise it up 10%. Here's the key. I don't like just matching their price if nothing changes. That's too transactional. What I mean by that is, okay, fine, we'll give it to you at the old price. Whoa. I thought you had to raise my price, right? It seems a little dishonest.
Yes.
I like to change the service offering at least a little bit. Okay, we always come on Tuesday. That was your promise today, but now we'll come any day.
Yeah. That's exactly
right.
And that's like, that goes back to that good, better, best. Like you've introduced a tier, you've put a bottom floor underneath them, and now we can go down to this, So that's a great option.
And I like your idea of, hey, giving the client incentive, kind of some bonus points.
Right,
like
exactly.
If you bring us a lead, then we'll give you some
Exactly.
And that's you can do that anytime. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I also like prepay.
Yeah.
Clients can prepay for the whole year if that's possible. Give them a discount, you get cash flow, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
I also think that hey, we will meet you halfway or whatever, but just know next year we'll have no choice.
Exactly.
Because at some point you can't operate in a negative or whatever. But I do think I've had clients before say, Adam, single mom, single income, I really need my grass cut. And I won't go into all the details, but I did work with her some. I think I delayed her payments for a couple months. And then she made good. But here's the deal. If she had never paid, I've been okay.
Yeah.
You have to be in a place that's okay if they never do fulfill their side of the bargain.
Yeah, and know you're in a unique time right now. Like that, you're probably going to make some mistakes, and things are going to work out in your favor and not. So it is important to, like you said, make sure your business is protected, but also cut yourself some slack. You're not going to navigate this perfectly. No one is. So it's okay. It's okay to experiment here and take some inexpensive lessons along the way.
Yeah. Have you ever felt I know in my worst moment, I can be a little flippant. Yeah, prices are growing up, man. Just deal with it.
Yeah.
Mr. Client. And
Yes,
I've never felt good about that when I feel flippant about it.
Yeah. You don't want the negotiation to end emotionally at all.
Richard, as we close, where do you think we're headed with inflation, and what's the future look like? What's your take on that?
Just before we came on the air yesterday, at the time of this recording, there was another CPI printout that had inflation way hotter than everybody expected. And that seems to have been the theme. It seems like we fell off these really high peaks, and now we're kind of hanging out at this level that's still too high, and there's no indication that it's going to tick back down. I'm telling our companies and the companies I work with to hunker down. It doesn't, before they were saying we're going to get 6 rate cuts this year. Well, now we don't know if we're going to get any. Going from that to this tells you that even the Fed's not sure where we're going to end up. I think you should just be conservative and plan on, I don't think inflation is going to take off again like 9% like it did before, but I do think it's going to hang around higher than 2% where they want it to be. So I'm planning for 3 to 4% throughout at least the next year, and maybe even no rate cuts going through the rest of the year. And I don't have a magic ball. I'm just a guy trying to run some businesses, but it just seems like that's kind of where we're headed.
Richard, this is a great conversation. I'm going to try to boil it down to 3 actionable steps. Number 1 is know your costs. Do it quarterly. Do a review of what you actually are spending per job and overhead and variable, all that kind of stuff. Do it quarterly. Don't obsess. Don't do it too frequently. But do it quarterly and have up-to-date data on what your actual costs are. Number 2 is play around with your pricing. Use tiered pricing. You might realize that you're giving your clients too much and you actually take some things away they won't even notice. That will make you more efficient and more profitable. And number 3, when you increase your rates or you're negotiating with a vendor, whatever the case may be, make sure you have an accurate number. Don't just throw out 5, 10, 15%. Actually make it 8.79% and make sure you actually know what your number is. It will seem more believable. Richard, this is great. Thanks for being here.
Thanks. It's been my pleasure.
How do people find out more about you?
On Instagram and Twitter, Mr. Wall Storage. You can look me up on there, shoot me a DM. I'm happy to help answer any questions. You can also find me at consultantsmallbusiness.com. That's my personal small business consulting agency. If you want to look at some of the work that I've done over the years, you can check out Wall Control at wallcontrol.com and see all of our house brands there.
I really appreciate you being here. I know that you're having a big impact in your companies. You're coaching people and teaching them these principles. So keep it up. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. I hope you heard something that will make your business more profitable and more efficient and help you tackle inflation. I'm your host, Adam Sylvester. You can find me at adamsylvester.com. Your team and your clients deserve your very best. So go give it to them.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that episode with me and Adam from Masters of Home Service, talking on the Jobber podcast. It was a pleasure of mine to be able to share the mic with these guys, and hope you got something out of it, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us. Organization Conversation is brought to you by Wall Control, a family-owned and operated producer of best-in-class wall-mounted organizers for your home or business, made right here in the USA. To learn more, go to wallcontrol.com.